Please, you have to help us. The words barely left the boy's lips as he clutched the edge of the Korean Mafia boss Junho's tailored sleeve, his small hands trembling against the crisp black fabric. His hospital gown, loose and pale blue, rustled with every shiver of fear that ran through him. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting cold, sterile shadows across the polished linoleum floors of the ward. Machines beeped in rhythmic pulses, ventilators sighing softly, and the scent of antiseptic hung thick in the air. Junho's dark eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over the boy, a mixture of curiosity and controlled authority in their depths, as if measuring the gravity of the words that had been whispered into the sterile space between them. The child's lips quivered, his eyes wide and earnest, scanning the imposing figure in front of him for any trace of doubt, any hesitation, any glimmer that might betray whether this man could be trusted in the moments that mattered most. "They're coming for my mom tonight," the boy whispered again, his voice barely audible over the soft hum of hospital machinery. "And you're the only one they're scared of." Junho's jaw tightened subtly, a silent acknowledgement of the stakes, his body still and composed, the kind of presence that filled a room without needing to raise a hand. The boy's tiny feet shuffled nervously on the cold floor, the hospital slippers slipping slightly with each anxious movement. And he looked up, searching for reassurance in the man whose reputation preceded him far beyond the walls of this city, a man known for command, for precision, for authority that even the shadows seemed to respect. In that moment, the child's vulnerability collided with the silent power of Junho, a stark contrast of innocence and controlled dominance. The boy's gaze flickered briefly toward the hallway, where nurses hurried past with clipped tones, papers in hand, unaware of the quiet tension that had settled into this corner of the hospital. The fluorescent light gleamed off the polished edge of a nearby counter, and the soft ticking of a wall clock punctuated the scene, marking each heartbeat that passed like a drumbeat of urgency. I don't know what to do," the boy murmured, his fingers clutching a corner of the sleeve as if tethering himself to hope. Junho's expression remained unreadable, his posture straight and commanding. Yet there was a subtle shift in his gaze, a hint of consideration, a fleeting softness that only the boy could sense amidst the imposing aura. The boy's chest rose and fell rapidly, a shallow rhythm that betrayed his fear and the weight of responsibility he imagined resting upon this one man. Around them, the sterile walls of the hospital seemed suddenly constricting, the pale blue paint a muted witness to the unspoken urgency in the air. Junho took a single measured step closer, the polished leather of his shoes whispering against the linoleum, and the boy's eyes widened as the authority in his movement combined with a near tangible stillness, creating a moment suspended between panic and the first glimmer of hope. The faint beeping of a monitor, the soft shuffle of nurses' feet, and the boy's anxious breathing created a rhythm that filled the quiet corridor, a tense soundtrack to a scene that demanded action, attention, and an understanding beyond words. Every detail mattered. The slight crinkle of the hospital gown, the tension in the boy's small shoulders, the subtle rise of Junho's brow as he considered the situation, and the unspoken promise in the silent understanding between them. The boy's fingers pressed harder against the sleeve, seeking a lifeline in the fabric, in the presence of someone whose reputation was carved out of fear, respect, and absolute control, and yet now held the potential for protection, for intervention, for reassurance in a world that seemed suddenly far too dangerous for someone so small. Junho's gaze softened just enough, a fleeting but deliberate signal that the boy's plea had been acknowledged, that his presence was more than a shadow of authority. It was a promise that for this night, he would be the one standing between the child and whatever threats lurked beyond the sterile walls, and in that quiet hospital corner, under the harsh fluorescent lights and amidst the relentless rhythm of beeping machines, a fragile trust began to form, tethered by the boy's whispered plea, and the quiet, unwavering strength of a man who was more than he appeared to be. Mira adjusted her scrubs, her hands moving quickly over the sterilized equipment in the pediatric wing, yet her mind remained fixed on the small figure gripping Junho's sleeve. She had been working at Seoul General Hospital for 3 months, navigating the endless corridors and the constant rhythm of beeping monitors, learning the precise timing of medication rounds and the nuances of patient care. Yet nothing had prepared her for this. Her eyes flickered between the boy and the imposing figure of Junho, whose presence seemed to bend the very air around him, a mixture of authority and silent assurance that could calm the most chaotic situations. The little boy, his cheeks flushed and eyes wide, tugged again gently at the sleeve, seeking confirmation that he had not misjudged whom he could trust. Mira knelt slightly, keeping her distance yet close enough to offer support, her voice soft, steady, and careful as she spoke. "He believes in you," she whispered, her words carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed too many moments of fear and hope intertwined. The boy nodded quickly, his small hands releasing the fabric for a moment only to clutch it again, a rhythmic gesture born from nervous energy and tentative trust. The fluorescent lights above highlighted the slight dampness of his hair from the hospital room fan, casting subtle shadows across the pale blue walls adorned with cheerful murals designed to distract from the sterile environment. Junho's eyes, dark and unreadable, followed every micro-expression of the boy, every subtle flick of movement, registering and calculating the emotional terrain with precision. Myra's heart beat in tandem with the boy's, a silent rhythm of empathy and anticipation, and she found herself silently hoping that the calm, composed exterior of Junho would translate into decisive action that would keep the boy's mother safe. The distant hum of ventilators, the soft click of nurses' shoes on linoleum, and the faint murmur of distant conversation formed a backdrop to the tension, punctuated by the boy's quiet, almost imperceptible whimpers that rose and fell in waves of fear and longing. Mira reached out a hand, hovering near the boy's shoulder, not touching, not to intrude but to signal presence, a reminder that even amidst authority and power, human connection mattered. The boy's gaze shifted from Mira to Junho, a silent question lingering in his eyes, searching for a flicker of reassurance, a hint that his belief in this man's ability to protect was not misplaced. Junho's stance did not falter, his breathing measured, his expression composed yet not unfeeling, a quiet acknowledgement of the responsibility that had been silently placed upon him. Myra's voice broke the thick tension. Once more, soft and deliberate, he needs to know someone is looking out for him, that it is safe to hope. The boy's grip on the sleeve tightened, a subtle shiver running through him, not from cold but from the weight of anticipation and trust. Junho's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, enough to convey attention and consideration without diminishing the aura of authority that surrounded him. Mira adjusted the strap of her badge, her movements precise yet careful to maintain the calm environment, and she noted the small details. The boy's rapid breathing slowing slightly, the faint twitch of his lips as he processed the presence of someone who could be relied upon, and the subtle shift in Junho's posture as he moved a single step closer, measuring distance with the precision of someone accustomed to command. Every moment stretched, filled with unspoken communication, with the quiet understanding that this night, these next steps would hinge on the courage, the choices, and the steady hands of those present. The monitors continued their rhythmic beeping. The soft overhead ventilation hummed, and the sterile air carried a fragile hope as the boy inhaled shakily, letting a fraction of the tension escape, his tiny eyes never leaving Junho, waiting for the first clear sign that his plea had been understood, that action was imminent, and that amidst the cold efficiency of the hospital, someone with unwavering resolve had accepted the weight of responsibility placed silently upon them. Mira stepped back slightly, giving the boy a safe space while keeping her eyes on Junho, who now moved with deliberate calm through the narrow corridor of the pediatric wing. The walls, painted in muted shades of blue and accented with colorful animal decals, stretched on either side, punctuated by closed doors behind which other patients rested under the watchful eyes of nurses and monitors. The faint hum of ventilation, mixed with the soft beeping of heart rate monitors, created a rhythm that mirrored the boy's shallow breathing, and Mira could see the tension in his small shoulders ease slightly as he felt the steadiness of Junho's presence nearby. The boy's gaze flicked to the large glass window at the end of the hall, where the moonlight streamed in, casting a silver sheen across the linoleum floor, and he tightened his grip on Junho's sleeve once more, a silent question lingering in his eyes. Mira, keeping her tone low and measured, spoke again. He needs to know that he is not alone, that there is someone he can trust completely. The boy nodded, the faint tremor in his lips betraying both fear and hope, and Junho's eyes softened imperceptibly, the hard lines of his face shifting just enough to communicate that he had heard, that he understood the stakes. The polished shoes of Junho echoed quietly in the hallway as he walked, each step deliberate, measured, a calm authority radiating from him that seemed to fill the space without a single word. Mira noticed the way the light caught the subtle texture of his suit, the careful tailoring accentuating the quiet power in his posture, and she knew the boy was responding not just to the man's reputation, but to the silent confidence that emanated from every movement. The boy's small feet shuffled against the cool linoleum, his hospital gown rustling with each tentative step forward, and his eyes remained fixed on Junho, as if searching for a signal that his plea had been acknowledged, that help was real and imminent. The distant murmur of nurses, the occasional clatter of carts, and the faint scent of antiseptic were the only background noises as Mira kept her focus on both the boy and the man who now had the weight of his trust in his hands. She noted the subtle rise and fall of the boy's chest, the way his small hands tightened briefly before relaxing against Junho's sleeve, and the slight tilt of Junho's head, a gesture so minimal yet so deliberate it conveyed both attention and understanding. The boy's breathing began to slow, each inhale and exhale more even, as if the mere presence of Junho had begun to steady him, and Mira felt a ripple of relief pass through her own chest, the quiet satisfaction of witnessing a fragile trust forming in the midst of uncertainty. The shadows cast by the overhead lights created subtle patterns on the walls, playing across the polished edges of the hallway counter and the soft padding of the hospital floor, a visual representation of the tension and hope intertwined in the room. Junho paused near the window, his gaze sweeping the length of the hall, and the boy's eyes followed every movement, his trust growing with each measured step, each silent signal that he was being seen, that he was being heard. Mira adjusted her position slightly, keeping herself just out of the boy's direct line of sight, while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing gently but firmly against her awareness, a reminder of the responsibility shared between them. The boy's lips parted slightly, a faint whisper escaping, and Junho's eyes met his, unblinking, composed, and yet carrying an unspoken promise that in this moment, amidst the cold efficiency of the hospital corridors, someone powerful and steady was present, someone who could protect, guide, and reassure, and the boy's small body relaxed fractionally, the first sign that his trust was beginning to take root, anchored by the quiet, unwavering strength of the man who had answered his silent call. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he followed Junho down the pale, brightly lit corridor, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the distant beeping of monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses attending to their rounds. Mira walked just behind them, her presence steady, her eyes scanning every detail of the hallway for any potential obstacle, every doorway a silent reminder that caution was necessary even in a place that should have been safe. The boy's gaze remained fixed on Junho, watching the subtle shift in his posture, the way his broad shoulders carried both authority and calm assurance, and he clutched the fabric of the sleeve again, seeking affirmation that he was being guided by someone he could trust completely. The overhead lights reflected softly off the smooth linoleum, highlighting the gentle creases in the boy's hospital gown and the polished edges of the handrails along the walls, and Mira noticed how the small details, the hum of ventilation, the faint scent of antiseptic, the muted colors of the muraled walls, combined to form a backdrop that contrasted sharply with the intensity of the moment. Junho's dark eyes flicked briefly to Mira, a silent acknowledgement of her role and presence, and then back to the boy, his expression calm but intensely focused, projecting reassurance through a subtle tilt of his head and a slight softening of his gaze. The boy's chest rose and fell more evenly now, his small hands loosening just slightly on the sleeve, the first tangible sign that the aura of calm surrounding Junho was having its effect. Mira kept her voice low, measured, and steady as she murmured encouragement. "You are not alone, and he will help you. Trust in the person standing beside you." The boy's lips quivered, a faint nod acknowledging her words, and he allowed his small body to relax fractionally, though his eyes never left Junho, who now moved with deliberate, unhurried steps toward a wider section of the hallway where the faint glow of emergency exit lights marked the way forward. The sterile scent of the hospital mixed with a subtle warmth that seemed to emanate from Junho, a presence that was both commanding and quietly comforting, and the boy took a tentative step, encouraged by the measured pace and steady demeanor of the man guiding him. Mira adjusted the strap of her identification badge, keeping her movements deliberate and careful, her mind attuned to every subtle change in the boy's posture and facial expression, noting the slight easing of tension around his shoulders and the careful rhythm of his breathing as he began to match the steps of Junho's gait. The fluorescent lights above cast soft reflections along the edges of the walls and handrails, emphasizing the contrast between the clinical environment and the subtle humanity unfolding in the corridor. The boy's eyes tracked every movement, each careful, controlled step by Junho reinforcing a sense of security, and Mira observed the tiny changes, a deeper exhale, a shift in the boy's fingers, a brief smile tugging at the corners of his mouth that signaled growing confidence. The soft clicking of shoes, the distant hum of medical equipment, and the quiet murmur of conversations further down the hall created a rhythm that punctuated the journey, a gentle beat against which the small moments of trust and assurance resonated. Junho paused briefly at a corner, glancing both ways before continuing, his gaze sweeping over the boy with an intensity that conveyed both protection and calculated attention, a silent promise that he was aware, present, and fully engaged in the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. The boy's grip on the sleeve loosened slightly, a subtle but meaningful sign that he was beginning to feel the quiet strength radiating from Junho, and Mira could see the delicate thread of trust being woven in real time, fragile yet undeniably present, connecting the boy to the man who had stepped into the hospital hallway and, in a matter of moments, had become a figure of unwavering support and calm authority. Each step carried them further along the polished corridor, yet in that controlled pace, filled with soft light, distant sounds, and careful observation, a sense of cautious hope began to settle, anchored by the steady presence of Junho and the quiet assurance that, despite the uncertainty of the night, the boy was not alone, and someone capable and vigilant had taken charge of the moment. Myra's hand hovered near the boy's shoulder, ready to provide comfort while allowing him the space to cling to Junho's sleeve as if it were a lifeline. The corridor stretched ahead, wide enough to accommodate the gentle hum of the ventilators and the occasional clink of trays from the nurse's station. Yet the quiet tension of the moment seemed to compress the space, making every movement deliberate and meaningful. The boy's breathing was more even now, though his small body still trembled slightly with anticipation, his wide eyes scanning Junho's calm, measured steps for reassurance. The sterile walls, painted in pale blue and adorned with whimsical murals of woodland creatures, offered a contrast to the seriousness of the situation, and Mira noted the subtle reflections of light on the polished linoleum floor, each glint marking the path they had to follow. Junho's posture remained perfectly controlled, a balance of authority and quiet attentiveness that radiated assurance without a single word being spoken. The boy's fingers curled gently around the sleeve, a tactile reminder of the trust he had placed in this man, and Mira felt the delicate weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders as she followed closely behind, observing the small cues of anxiety and relief that crossed the boy's face. The distant beeping of heart monitors, the faint shuffle of nurses' shoes, and the soft hum of ventilation created a rhythm that underscored the urgency of the moment without overwhelming it, allowing each small gesture, each measured glance, to carry the emotional weight of the scene. The boy's lips parted slightly, whispering fragments of concern, and Junho inclined his head subtly, acknowledging the words while maintaining a composed front, the minimal gesture communicating both recognition and control. Myra's eyes followed the interplay between the boy and Junho, noting the subtle easing of tension in the child's shoulders, the slight deepening of his breaths, and the minute adjustments in his posture that suggested a growing sense of safety. The polished shoes of Junho made a soft rhythm on the linoleum, each step deliberate, measured, and infused with a quiet authority that the boy seemed to absorb instinctively, the proximity of such calm confidence gradually soothing the tremors of fear that had gripped him moments before. The fluorescent lights overhead reflected off the edges of handrails and counters, highlighting the clean, clinical environment while casting subtle shadows that added depth to the corridor, a visual echo of the contrast between vulnerability and power unfolding within it. Mira kept her movements slow and intentional, ensuring that her presence was stabilizing without intruding, and she observed the way the boy's gaze shifted between her and Junho, seeking reassurance, processing the silent cues, and beginning to internalize the quiet promise of protection embedded in each controlled step. The soft whir of a ceiling fan and the faint murmur of distant conversation blended seamlessly with the subtle creak of a door hinge, providing a backdrop to the silent exchange of trust and determination. Junho paused briefly to allow the boy to adjust, his dark eyes scanning the corridor ahead and noting every detail, every potential distraction, and every subtle signal that might influence the child's sense of security. The boy's grip on the sleeve loosened fractionally as he recognized the unwavering steadiness of Junho's presence, and Mira felt a ripple of relief pass through her as the small but significant moment of trust took hold, anchored by the quiet authority and attentive consideration of the man who had silently assumed responsibility for their safety and well-being in this pale, softly lit hospital corridor. Junho paused at the intersection of the main corridor and the side wing, his dark eyes scanning the surrounding hospital rooms with precise attention, the quiet hum of the ventilation system blending with the intermittent beeping of nearby monitors. Mira adjusted the strap of her identification badge again, moving cautiously behind him, her gaze flicking between the boy and the doors lining the hallway, each one a potential obstacle, yet also a barrier that offered a sense of safety. The boy's small hand remained lightly pressed against Junho's sleeve, a tether of trust and hope, and his breathing had become more measured, though the faint quiver in his shoulders betrayed the lingering tension of uncertainty. The walls, painted a calming shade of soft blue, reflected the muted glow of the overhead fluorescent lights, highlighting the gentle curve of the handrails and the polished linoleum floor that stretched in orderly lines ahead. Junho's expression remained composed, yet a subtle shift in the angle of his head and the narrowing of his eyes conveyed an active assessment of every detail, a silent communication that he was fully aware of the responsibility now resting in his hands. Myra's eyes tracked the boy's subtle movements, noting how he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, how his fingers flexed briefly before relaxing against the sleeve, signs that he was beginning to internalize the quiet assurance radiating from Junho. The distant footsteps of nurses, the occasional rustle of carts, and the soft murmurs from adjoining rooms created a rhythmic backdrop, emphasizing the controlled tension in the immediate vicinity. Junho paused, his gaze sweeping the hallway, and the boy's eyes followed each movement, searching for even the slightest signal of encouragement or guidance. Mira leaned slightly forward, her voice a gentle murmur. He needs to feel that he is seen, that there is someone he can rely on completely. and the boy's eyes flickered with a faint spark of understanding, his grip on the sleeve loosening just enough to convey tentative trust. The polished surfaces along the corridor reflected the soft light, creating subtle highlights that accentuated the clean, clinical environment while framing the figures moving steadily down the hallway. Junho's steps were measured, each one deliberate, producing a quiet rhythm against the linoleum that seemed to synchronize with the boy's gradually steadying breaths. Mira observed the delicate micro-expressions on the boy's face, the slight easing of tension around his eyes and jaw, and the small sigh that escaped him, signaling the first layer of comfort settling in. The boy's attention remained unwaveringly on Junho, and Mira could see the subtle interplay of trust and anticipation, the way he leaned slightly toward the protective presence beside him while still maintaining his own agency. The quiet flicker of fluorescent light along the handrails cast alternating shadows, giving a visual sense of depth and emphasizing the contrast between the vulnerability of the child and the solid, composed presence of Junho. The boy's lips parted slightly, whispering fragments of concern, and Junho inclined his head almost imperceptibly, acknowledging each word with a measured attentiveness that spoke volumes without sound. Mira noticed the tiny adjustments in his posture, the gentle alignment of his shoulders as he subtly angled toward the boy, signaling protection and awareness, a wordless promise that he had taken the full measure of the responsibility he now bore. The ambient sounds, the hum of ventilation, the distant clatter of a rolling cart, the low murmur of conversation from an adjacent hallway, formed a rhythm that underscored the emotional weight of the moment, framing each careful step and subtle gesture with the cadence of quiet tension. Junho's dark eyes met the boy's again, unwavering and calm, and the boy responded with a small nod, the first conscious acknowledgement that the trust placed in the man beside him was not misplaced. Mira allowed herself a brief exhale, sensing the fragile but undeniable thread of confidence and reassurance beginning to form between the boy and Junho, a connection that promised guidance, stability, and the quiet assurance that, for this night, the child was not alone and someone capable and vigilant had assumed responsibility for his safety within the sterile, softly lit corridors of the hospital. Junho paused at the entrance to a wider corridor, the pale blue walls stretching into a junction where several patient rooms converged, and Mira adjusted her pace to stay just behind him while keeping a careful watch on the boy. The child's small hand lingered on the fabric of Junho's sleeve, fingers flexing slightly with a nervous energy that still pulsed beneath the surface of growing trust, and his eyes darted from the man to the hallway ahead, seeking confirmation that every step was safe. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a soft reflection across the polished linoleum, illuminating the boy's hospital gown and the subtle sheen of Junho's meticulously tailored suit, highlighting the contrast between the child's vulnerability and the composed authority beside him. Mira noted the quiet patterns of shadow and light, the gentle hum of the ventilation system, and the faint rhythmic beeping from a nearby monitor, all creating a backdrop of calm observation against the tension of the situation. The boy took a careful breath, the rise and fall of his small chest matching the slow, measured pace of Junho's steps, and Mira could see the first signs of relief flicker across his expression, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly as he internalized the quiet assurance of guidance. Junho's dark eyes swept over the corridor, taking in every detail, the closed doors, the polished railings, the muted reflections on the linoleum floor, registering the environment with precision while maintaining an aura of calm authority that anchored both Mira and the boy. The soft shuffle of shoes from distant nurses, the faint click of a rolling cart, and the subdued murmurs from other parts of the wing punctuated the moment, allowing every subtle gesture and glance to resonate with significance. Mira leaned slightly forward, speaking in a voice low enough to be heard without disturbing the atmosphere. He needs to feel steady, that every step is safe and watched, and the boy's eyes met hers briefly, a fleeting acknowledgement of reassurance before returning to Junho. The man's posture remained composed, each movement deliberate and controlled, exuding a sense of protective attentiveness that seemed to envelop the boy in a quiet, invisible shield, and Mira could sense the subtle easing of tension in the child's small shoulders, the slow deepening of his breaths, and the gentle relaxation of his fingers against the sleeve. The corridor ahead stretched toward a cluster of patient rooms, the walls lined with soft decals of animals and trees, the sterile environment softened by touches meant to comfort, and the boy's gaze followed Junho intently, learning through observation the rhythm of his steps and the unspoken signals of reassurance embedded in each deliberate movement. The soft glow of the fluorescent lights highlighted the polished surfaces of counters and rails, casting subtle shadows that danced gently along the walls, mirroring the interplay of vulnerability and authority unfolding in the corridor. Mira maintained her position just behind the boy, careful to remain within reach yet not imposing, noting the tiny shifts in his posture, the subtle relaxation of his facial muscles, and the slight exhale that indicated growing confidence. The boy's lips parted slightly, forming a soft murmur of concern, and Junho inclined his head just enough to acknowledge the words, communicating both attentiveness and composure, a silent understanding that reinforced the bond of trust forming in that moment. The hum of the ventilation, the faint beeping of a distant monitor, and the muted footfalls elsewhere created a steady auditory rhythm that underscored the quiet tension and growing calm. Every careful step, every subtle gesture, every measured glance contributed to a tapestry of trust as the boy began to learn that the presence beside him was unwavering, and Mira felt a profound sense of relief as she observed the first significant glimmer of stability and assurance settle over the small figure. The quiet power of Junho transforming the atmosphere of the pale, softly lit hospital corridor into a space of controlled safety and tentative hope. As they continued down the quiet corridor, Junho's gaze remained steady, fixed on the subtle details of the hospital around them, while the boy clung lightly to his sleeve, a mix of curiosity and trust reflected in his wide eyes. Mira followed closely, her own steps measured, noticing every nuance in the child's shifting expressions and small gestures that spoke volumes about his lingering anxiety and emerging courage. The walls, painted in gentle tones of blue and green, were dotted with cheerful illustrations meant to comfort young patients. Yet the contrast between the sterile environment and the emotional gravity of the moment was striking, emphasizing the boy's vulnerability and the weight of responsibility resting on Junho. A soft murmur of distant conversation from nurses, the faint rolling of carts, and the rhythmic beeping of monitors created an ambient soundtrack that underscored the careful pacing of their movement, the boy's shallow breaths gradually becoming more regular as he adjusted to the controlled, protective presence beside him. Mira leaned slightly forward, speaking softly so that only the boy could hear. "You are safe because he is here, and he will not let anything happen to your mom." And she watched as the tension in his shoulders eased, a subtle nod acknowledging her words and reinforcing the fragile thread of trust forming in the space between them. Junho's dark eyes flicked from the boy to the surrounding corridor and back again, taking in the polished handrails, the soft glow of fluorescent lighting reflecting off the linoleum, and the orderly arrangement of patient rooms, his awareness meticulous, his mind calculating each movement with the precision of someone accustomed to control and vigilance. The boy's small feet shuffled slightly, matching the rhythm of Junho's slow, deliberate steps, and his grip on the sleeve relaxed fractionally, a sign of growing confidence as he absorbed the quiet authority and reassurance exuding from the man beside him. Mira observed the subtle interplay of light and shadow along the corridor, the soft reflections highlighting the smooth floor and gentle curves of the handrails, and she noted how the child's eyes were drawn to these details, grounding him in the environment, even as his thoughts remained focused on the promise of protection inherent in Junho's presence. Each measured step taken by Junho seemed to reverberate through the boy's awareness, a silent rhythm of reliability and calm that contrasted sharply with the underlying tension of the night and the uncertainty that had brought them here. The hum of ventilation, the faint tapping of distant shoes, and the subdued murmur of activity in adjoining rooms formed a steady backdrop, allowing the emotional nuances of the moment to emerge with clarity. The tentative release of fear, the gradual recognition of safety, and the quiet affirmation of trust. The boy's lips moved slightly, forming a soft murmur, and Junho inclined his head in acknowledgement, a minimal but deliberate gesture that communicated attention, presence, and reassurance without the need for words, reinforcing the developing bond between them. Mira felt a quiet satisfaction at the small changes, the subtle easing of tension in his face, the more even rise and fall of his chest, the relaxed flexing of his fingers along the fabric of the sleeve, that signaled the first tangible signs of comfort and confidence settling in. The polished corridor, the gentle glow of lights, and the patterned murals provided a visual frame for the evolving connection, emphasizing the contrast between vulnerability and strength, fear and reassurance, and the delicate interplay of human presence, trust, and care. Junho's steps carried them further along the hospital wing, and with each careful movement, the boy's trust deepened, Myra's observations confirmed, and the quiet, unwavering presence of the man beside him solidified the sense of safety and attentive protection that had begun to define the space around them. Junho led the boy and Mira into a small alcove near the nurse's station, a section of the hospital where the light was softer, the walls painted in warm pastel tones, and the ambient noise of the ward seemed to fade into a gentle hum. The boy's hands lingered on Junho's sleeve, still cautious but more confident, his breathing steadier, the fear in his wide eyes tempered by the quiet reassurance that radiated from the man beside him. Mira moved slightly to the side, giving space while maintaining a vigilant watch, noting the subtle changes in the boy's posture, the easing of tension in his shoulders, and the small, almost imperceptible nods that conveyed recognition of safety. The polished linoleum reflected the diffused light above, highlighting the gentle curves of the handrails and the cheerful animal decals along the lower walls, a contrast to the gravity of the boy's earlier anxiety. Junho's gaze scanned the alcove, taking in the details with precision, the placement of equipment, the potential routes for movement, the presence of staff nearby, while maintaining a composed and authoritative demeanor that seemed to ground the boy in the moment. Mira whispered softly, "He is seeing that someone is watching, that it is safe to believe in protection," and the boy's small nod in response, paired with a slight exhale, indicated that he was beginning to internalize the sense of security being offered. Junho paused, his dark eyes meeting the boy's, and a subtle lift of his brow conveyed attention and recognition, a quiet signal that he was present not only physically but emotionally, attuned to the unspoken concerns and the weight of trust in that small hand holding his sleeve. The gentle hum of the ventilation, the faint beeping of nearby monitors, and the soft shuffle of nurses moving quietly through the ward created a rhythm that underscored the calm intensity of the scene, allowing each small gesture, each measured step, to resonate with meaning. The boy's gaze followed Junho's movements closely, his small body leaning slightly forward in anticipation, fingers flexing against the fabric with a tentative trust that had been hard-earned in the span of this brief but intense encounter. Mira adjusted her position, maintaining proximity without imposing, noting the delicate shifts in the child's expression, the softening of his brow, the subtle relaxation around his jaw, the way his eyes briefly closed in a moment of calm as he drew a deeper breath. The light reflected off the polished floor, casting gentle highlights on the boy's hospital gown and Junho's suit, visually framing the interplay of vulnerability and authority that defined the space. Junho inclined his head slightly, a minimal but deliberate movement that conveyed acknowledgement and reassurance, and the boy responded with a small, tentative smile, the first clear sign of comfort settling into his demeanor. Mira could see the subtle interplay of trust forming in the boy's eyes, the way he shifted slightly closer while maintaining his grip on the sleeve, and the gradual easing of tension in his posture, signaling that the quiet, unwavering presence of Junho had begun to anchor him. The corridor around them, while filled with the sterile trappings of the hospital, seemed to expand in warmth and calm through the interactions of the three, the careful, deliberate steps, the soft guidance, and the attentive glances creating a moment of stability and connection that reached beyond the physical space. Each careful movement, each subtle acknowledgement, reinforced the boy's growing confidence. The quiet authority of Junho and Myra's steady, supportive presence, all combining to transform the otherwise ordinary hospital hallway into a space imbued with trust, reassurance, and the gentle emergence of hope. Junho reached a small sitting area at the end of the corridor where few chairs and a low table offered a brief moment of respite from the long stretch of hospital rooms, and the boy's grip on his sleeve loosened just enough to allow a small, tentative exhale, his wide eyes taking in the slightly warmer lighting and the muted colors of the walls that contrasted with the starkness of the linoleum floors. Mira adjusted her stance, keeping herself close enough to intervene if necessary, but allowing the boy to feel the authority and calm of Junho's presence without interference. Her own breathing syncing with the gentle rhythm of the ambient monitors and the soft hum of the ventilation system overhead. The boy's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension of anticipation slowly giving way to a cautious comfort as he realized that each careful step forward had been guided, observed, and protected by the steady figure beside him. Junho's dark eyes scanned the alcove, noting the placement of chairs, the location of the nearest nurse call buttons, and the subtle angles of the walls, all while maintaining a composed demeanor that radiated quiet confidence and unwavering attention. Myra's eyes followed the interplay of gestures and expressions, observing the small changes in the boy's posture, the softening of his furrowed brow, the slight rise and fall of his chest becoming more even, the gentle movement of his fingers as they relaxed against the sleeve. The fluorescent lights cast soft reflections across the floor, highlighting the boy's hospital gown and the tailored lines of Junho's suit, emphasizing the contrast between innocence and controlled authority. The boy's lips parted slightly as he murmured a quiet question, and Junho inclined his head subtly, acknowledging the words with a precise, deliberate movement that conveyed recognition and reassurance without breaking the calm of the moment. Mira noticed the gradual easing in the boy's movements, the way he shifted slightly closer while maintaining balance, the faint spark of trust in his eyes that had been absent only moments before, signaling that the steady presence and deliberate attention of Junho had begun to anchor him in a space that had previously felt uncertain. The hum of the ventilation, the intermittent beeping of distant monitors, and the subdued shuffling of nurses' shoes formed a gentle rhythm that underscored the unfolding scene, allowing the small gestures, careful glances, and nuanced movements to carry the full weight of emotional connection. Junho's steps remained measured, each one producing a subtle echo on the polished floor, reinforcing a quiet cadence that seemed to resonate with the boy's gradually steadying breathing. Mira spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can feel that someone is looking out for you, that it is safe to rely on him." And the boy's eyes flickered briefly toward her, then returned to Junho, a small nod communicating comprehension and tentative trust. The shadows cast by the chairs and low table created gentle patterns on the floor, highlighting the subtle interplay between vulnerability and protection, fear and reassurance, and the deliberate attention that Junho projected through posture, gaze, and measured movement. The boy's shoulders uncurled slightly, his hands relaxing further, and Mira could see the faintest hint of a smile forming as he sensed that the steady, attentive presence of Junho was more than authority. It was guidance, protection, and quiet affirmation that, in this small corner of the hospital, he was being watched over, his trust valued, and his fears acknowledged without a single word disrupting the delicate balance of calm. Junho guided the boy and Mira into a slightly larger observation room, where the windows overlooked a quiet courtyard bathed in the gentle glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds, creating a soft interplay of shadow and warm reflection across the polished linoleum floor. The boy's hands, once tightly gripping Junho's sleeve, now rested lightly, a tentative sign of growing trust. His breathing slower and more even, and his wide eyes shifted between the man beside him and the softly illuminated walls, absorbing every subtle detail of his surroundings. Mira stepped carefully to the side, her gaze alternating between the boy and Junho, noting the micro-expressions, the slight easing of the boy's brow, the subtle softening around his lips, and the faint quiver of relief passing through his small shoulders that indicated the fragile thread of confidence beginning to form. The quiet hum of the ventilation system, the distant beeping of monitors, and the faint shuffle of nurses attending to other rooms provided a gentle rhythm that underscored the calm intensity of the moment, allowing each movement, glance, and gesture to carry emotional weight. Junho's posture remained impeccable, each step measured and deliberate, conveying quiet authority while simultaneously projecting reassurance. His dark eyes sweeping the room and noting the placement of equipment, the angles of the walls, and the proximity of exits, all while maintaining an aura of calm attentiveness. The boy's gaze followed every subtle motion, his small body leaning slightly toward Junho, fingers flexing gently as he adjusted to the steady presence. And Mira observed the way his breathing deepened, his shoulders relaxing incrementally, and the small, almost imperceptible nods he offered as acknowledgement of safety. The light from the overhead fixtures reflected softly off the polished surfaces, accentuating the boy's pale blue hospital gown and the tailored lines of Junho's suit, framing the scene in a visual contrast of vulnerability and quiet strength. Mira whispered softly, "He is feeling that someone is truly here for him, that it is safe to trust," and the boy's gaze flicked toward her briefly, then back to Junho, a small nod affirming his understanding and tentative sense of security. The subtle patterns of light and shadow along the walls, the gentle color of the muraled surfaces, and the polished linoleum floor all contributed to a serene environment, a backdrop against which the emerging trust and developing sense of safety could take root. Junho inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement of the boy's soft murmur, a small, deliberate gesture that communicated attention and understanding without words, reinforcing the quiet bond forming between them. The boy's posture shifted minutely, a subtle relaxation of tension, as he absorbed the composed, attentive presence of Junho, and Mira felt a wave of relief at the first tangible signs of confidence settling into the child. Each careful step, each measured glance, and each silent gesture contributed to a growing tapestry of trust, the gentle rhythm of their movement echoing the gradual easing of anxiety in the boy's small frame. The ambient sounds, the soft hum of the ventilation, the faint beeping of distant monitors, the muted shuffle of footsteps elsewhere created a steady cadence that underscored the quiet intensity of the moment, allowing the fragile, yet growing, sense of safety and reassurance to take hold fully. The boy's small lips parted slightly, a soft exhale escaping as he absorbed the stability and attention surrounding him, his eyes meeting Junho's dark gaze with a tentative spark of gratitude and trust, signaling that in this softly lit, serene observation room, amidst the ordinary hospital details, a quiet but profound connection had formed, and he felt, for the first time that evening, that he was truly seen, truly heard, and genuinely protected. The boy sat quietly now, his small frame no longer trembling as he traced the edge of Junho's sleeve with a soft, tentative touch, his wide eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and curiosity as he absorbed the calm, protective presence beside him. Mira stood nearby, observing with careful attention, noting the subtle shifts in the boy's posture, the easing of tension around his shoulders, the slow deepening of his breaths, and the slight relaxation of his fingers, all signs that the steady authority and attentiveness of Junho were taking root in a tangible, comforting way. The soft glow of the overhead lights bathed the observation room in a gentle warmth, the pale blue walls and muted mural details providing a serene backdrop that emphasized the contrast between the boy's initial anxiety and the growing sense of safety now permeating the space. The hum of the ventilation system and the occasional distant beep of monitors created a rhythmic, almost meditative soundscape, allowing each movement, glance, and micro-expression to carry emotional weight and significance. Junho remained composed, his posture straight and deliberate, eyes sweeping the room to take in every detail while maintaining an aura of quiet reassurance, projecting confidence and attentiveness that the boy instinctively understood and began to rely upon. Mira adjusted her stance slightly, leaning in just enough to offer presence without intrusion, her gaze alternating between the boy and Junho as she noted the small, almost imperceptible nods the boy gave, acknowledging the protection and guidance that had been silently offered through the careful, measured movements of the man beside him. The polished linoleum reflected the soft lighting, highlighting the textures of the boy's hospital gown and the smooth tailoring of Junho's suit, creating a visual contrast that reinforced the interplay of vulnerability and quiet. Authority. The boy's lips parted slightly, whispering a hesitant question, and Junho inclined his head in a subtle, deliberate gesture that communicated understanding and attention without the need for words, reinforcing the trust that had begun to take shape. Mira observed the minute adjustments in the boy's posture, the gentle shift in his weight, and the gradual easing of tension in his jaw and shoulders, all indicators that the emotional barrier of fear was slowly giving way to acceptance and cautious confidence. The soft patterns of shadow and light across the walls and floor enhanced the atmosphere of calm focus, framing the scene in a way that made the steady presence of Junho even more pronounced, a reassuring anchor in the boy's shifting emotional landscape. The boy's eyes followed each subtle movement, each measured step, and each silent signal of attentiveness, his trust consolidating into a quiet, growing confidence that he was not alone and that someone capable and vigilant was fully present. Myra's voice, low and steady, reminded him gently, "You are safe here, and someone is watching over you completely." And the boy responded with a faint, almost imperceptible nod, his small hands relaxing further while still maintaining a light touch on the sleeve, a tactile affirmation of connection and reassurance. The hum of the ventilation and the distant soft shuffle of nurses' shoes underscored the stillness of the moment, allowing the quiet development of trust, attentiveness, and calm to resonate fully. Each measured glance, subtle nod, and careful gesture contributed to the slowly unfolding sense of stability, and the boy, feeling the unwavering presence of Junho, began to settle into a state of cautious comfort, understanding that in this softly lit hospital observation room, he was truly seen, genuinely heard, and quietly protected by someone whose calm authority had transformed the space into a haven of security and gentle reassurance. Junho finally led the boy and Mira to a quiet corner of the hospital near the large windows that looked out onto the softly illuminated courtyard, the gentle glow of the streetlights outside filtering through the blinds and casting long, calm shadows across the polished linoleum floor. The boy, now more confident in the presence of Junho, allowed his hands to rest lightly on the sleeve, his breathing slow and even, a subtle smile beginning to form as the weight of fear lifted gradually, replaced by a sense of safety and understanding. Mira observed silently, noting the minute changes in his posture, the softening of his shoulders, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and the subtle relaxation of his fingers that indicated trust had taken root, fragile but undeniable. The hum of the ventilation system, punctuated by the distant beeping of monitors and the faint shuffle of nurses moving about their rounds, provided a steady rhythm, a calm soundtrack that accentuated the quiet significance of the moment. Junho's eyes swept the room with measured attention, taking in the polished surfaces, the placement of chairs, and the angle of the window light, all while maintaining a composed and reassuring presence that projected authority without intimidation. The boy's gaze followed him intently, absorbing the silent cues, the careful, deliberate gestures, and the subtle shifts in expression that communicated reassurance and care. Mira whispered softly, "He is seeing that he is not alone, that he is protected, and the boy nodded slightly, a tentative acknowledgement that the steady presence beside him was more than a figure of authority. It was a source of comfort and guidance. The warm reflection of the lights on the linoleum, the muted colors of the walls, and the soft textures of the room created an environment that contrasted with the boy's initial anxiety, highlighting the emergence of calm and the slow consolidation of trust. Junho inclined his head subtly, a minimal yet deliberate movement that conveyed acknowledgement and understanding, reinforcing the boy's confidence and the growing sense of connection that had formed between them. The boy's lips parted in a small exhale, a sound that carried relief, and his eyes lingered on Junho's face, searching for the reassurance that had been consistently offered through silent attention and careful movement. Mira noticed the subtle exchange, the interplay of trust and observation, and the quiet affirmation that, in this softly lit corner of the hospital, the boy had begun to feel safe, truly seen, and valued. Each detail, the polished surfaces, the filtered light, the ambient sounds, and the carefully measured presence of Junho, worked together to reinforce a sense of stability and calm, allowing the boy's fears to recede gradually. His hands loosened further on the sleeve, a physical indication that he was learning to trust, to believe in the protection provided, and to accept the quiet reassurance of attentive care. The room, though simple in its furnishings and clinical in its purpose, became a sanctuary of calm, anchored by the measured, deliberate presence of Junho and the attentive support of Mira, who remained close but unobtrusive. The boy's small shoulders relaxed fully, his expression lightening, and his breathing became steady and untroubled, a clear sign that the moment of vulnerability had shifted into one of quiet confidence and security. The soft glow of the window light, the gentle hum of the ventilation, and the faint background rhythm of distant hospital activity framed the scene, accentuating the emerging bond of trust and protection. In that softly illuminated corner, the boy felt seen, heard, and safeguarded, and the presence of Junho and Mira created a quiet, lasting sense of reassurance, a moment of calm in which trust had been earned and the promise of care had been fully realized.